Aquaba, greetings. Hello, happy Sunday. We are so glad that you are here to join us for this latest edition of Our Ancestors' Voices, a program sponsored each week, same day, same time by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Our topic today is Ernesto Che Guevara all day long. We're going to be dispelling and discrediting the lies that are told about Comrade Guevara by the imperialist system, especially the ones designed to discredit his legacy with African people. So if you're interested in that, you're in the right place. There's certainly a lot going on today, and we want to speak to as much of it as we can. Our hearts and our commitment to justice are certainly with the Palestinian people today. The illegal settler state of the Zionist state of Israel, through their consistent campaign of lies to justify their theft of Palestinian land, are now accusing the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip or Hamas of attacking them. So they're using that as a pretense to attack the people of Gaza. And if you know anything about that region of the world, the concept of the people of Gaza, very small, like a 25 square foot mile territory that was left for the Palestinian people in their homeland, attacking one of the world powers is utterly ridiculous. And anybody that believes that, you just don't know what the hell is happening in that region of the world. So we stand with the Palestinian people. Of course, they're standing up and fighting back. And some of the other elements over there are uniting and assisting them, like Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so, of course, the Zionist criminals in the state of Israel are bombing Lebanon. But there are protests all over the world. There's one happening right now, kicking off in San Francisco, just a short distance from here. And were it not for our commitment and responsibility to this program, certainly would be out there today. So we give honor and respect to our Palestinian comrades and wish them strength in their struggle against the filthy Zionists that are occupying their territory. And of course, we have our QR screen on the QR code rather on the screen. Today is the birthday of the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity in Burkina Faso, which is, of course, a program on the ground in Burkina Faso, West Africa, that was founded by All African People's Revolutionary Party organizers, as well as other organizers on the ground there in Burkina Faso. So we want to extend a strong happy birthday to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity. They had a wonderful ceremony there they broadcast throughout the world and warmed our hearts to see that. And we want you to use this QR code to definitely support the work they are doing in Burkina Faso. They're simply buying books and providing them to the masses of African people in Burkina Faso, but they're not buying See Jane Run, See Dick Walk books. They're buying literature by revolutionary Pan-Africanists, Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Amilcar Cabral, and so on and so forth. This is the literature that's needed for us to cleanse our minds and our hearts and give us the strength to engage in this struggle for justice that we're engaged in. So click on the QR code. We have the URL. They're asking you just simply to pledge a certain amount every month. And what we want to ask you to do is, if you become a sponsor, however much you can contribute, it's worthwhile. If you become a sponsor to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, please leave us a note in the comment section and just say, I became a sponsor. You don't have to say how much. That's not important. The important thing is that you're supporting the Pan-African work on the ground happening all over the world to liberate our people. So we give thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere and their fight to regain their struggle for liberation. We had a program about what's happening in the Sahel region of Africa in Oakland Thursday night, and we were honored, as we always are, to have our brother Tony Gonzalez from the American Indian Movement West to speak at the program. And it was really the things that he talked about in terms of the work that they're engaged in to bring sovereignty to the indigenous people. Very important. They're commemorating Indigenous Peoples Day with their sunrise ceremony on the island of Alcatraz down here in the San Francisco Bay here tomorrow morning. So our hearts and definitely our spirits will be with them and all the people who commemorate their struggle for freedom and justice. And of course, we honor our ancestors, the people who have come before us. I had the honor and privilege to attend a memorial yesterday here in Sacramento for a longtime African in the community here, Dr. David Colvin, who had contributed so much to our people's liberation. Not only was he my master's thesis advisor and really was one of the main reasons why I made it through that backward ass program, but he was also a committed activist in the community. And I had a chance over the years to work with him often on projects that were designed to bring about African unity. So his passing is a loss to this community, but I certainly would not be the person that I am without the contributions of ancestors like him. So we give honor and respect to all of our ancestors who contribute to our people's forward progress. And we thank you for joining us today. Che Guevara is certainly an ancestor worthy of our respect, and we will do our best to honor his legacy, especially as it relates to us as African people. He was not an African by his own definition and by his family lineage. He certainly had more of a European heritage than anything else, but this was a man who stood and worked for justice and who was courageous. And that's what we'll be talking about as we dispel the lies that are designed to discredit him in your eyes. So we'll just start with our brief introductions. Before we get started, we have the mechanisms in which you can donate to the All African People's Revolutionary Party, support independent revolutionary Pan-African organizations. If you don't want to support the APRP, support some other organization, the Black Alliance for Peace, some organization working for justice. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, APRP. APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. Our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is carried out in the outline in Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. Our work going on in places like Guinea-Bissau and Burkina Faso and Ghana and Kenya and Tanzania, or what you call South Africa, are examples of the on-the-ground work we are doing every day to build Pan-African unity all over the world. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by AAPRP organizers, myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Shakura. So to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings, everyone. Hoping you all are in good spirits and doing well. So excited to talk about our comrade Che today. It's always important for us to reevaluate what information we have, where we had it, where we got access to it, and doing the best that we can to be critical of the information, especially if there's a small chance that it's coming from a place that is not accurate and not based on justice-loving truth and facts. So with that, we start by telling more about the upbringing of this comrade, what their life was like, and how they came to be the person that they were. And so we start with understanding that Che had a very bourgeoisie lifestyle and access as an Argentinian. And the upbringing that he had in Argentina actually landed him an opportunity to attend medical school. And so just thinking about that, he naturally became a medically trained doctor because of the path that he was already on. And his family wanted desperately, very much so, for him to just fall into the Argentina's bourgeoisie circles and class status. So just to maintain that status quo and to continue on with the legacy that other medically trained doctors would do. They wanted him to stay on that path so that he could continue to benefit from that lifestyle and what that position and what that privilege would bring another person in that same situation. In his early 20s, he left with a friend to ride his motorcycle across Central and South America. And I would argue that this is really where he started to kind of evaluate things from a different lens. And I see a lot of similarities between myself and with Che, actually, because, in my late 20s, I think that's really where I started to kind of lose some of the capitalist ideologies that I had ingrained in myself. Even though I had a very revolutionary and Pan-Africanist upbringing, capitalism works overtime. We all know that, on trying its best to push its agenda down our throats. And so, yes, as a 17-year-old and 18-year-old, I was still trying to unpack some of that. But kudos to any of us, especially those of us who are in organizations, because we understand that if you're in an organization, that means you're trying to develop, you're trying to grow. You're not going to come out of the womb as a revolutionary person. You're not going to come out of the womb as a socialist. You're not going to come out of the womb as a Pan-Africanist. That takes time. Those are skills. You have to develop those skills. You have to work on building them, just like you would a muscle, just like you would if you're trying to learn something new and you're developing your brain, or if you're trying to work on building up your core. You're going to have to work on doing some burpees or mountain climbers, and it's going to be uncomfortable, because personally, I don't like mountain climbers, but that's the best way for us to truly engage that core and to build those muscles. And so our comrade Che Guevara, I really commend him, because, you could have that opportunity to really start to evaluate things differently as an early 20-something-year-old. And again, like, we're arguing this is happening because he decided to travel across those two spaces as well. And so it's important to know that because of his travels through Central America, because of his travels through South America, that's because he was able to get a different lens. And so again, the importance of having a passport, or having a way for you to just have access to other points of view, for you to have access to other parts where maybe the government is not the same government. This is why we encourage you all, A, to join an organization that's working for justice, but B, to get a passport if you don't have one, and to leave the US and to see another part of the world. Yes, we would encourage you to start off and go to Africa, but maybe that's too far for you. So maybe you start somewhere else. Maybe you start in Argentina, where our comrade was born, and just get some experiences and go from there. Because being in another country, unlike the USA, is just going to change your perspective. I promise you it is. And it's going to make you want to leave as much as possible. You're not going to want to come back. And when you do, you're like, it's really time for me to go again. And you start to feel like an itch, like, oh, I've been in the US too long. And you start to feel a lot differently about it. I'm telling you. So that could just be my experience, but I'm grateful that this organization that I'm trying to grow and learn and be better at, I'm grateful that the work study process that I'm trying to grow and learn and be better at, both of those entities in my life have taught me that the US is not the end all be all. They have taught me that, and my parents have taught me that, because they also are in these organizations, or at some point were, and are still strongly influenced by this organization and by work studies ideologies. And so we understand that Che was doing what he thought was just a cool experience to ride with his friend across Central and South America, but really he was also open to the possibility that he was starting to unpack things from a different ideological lens. And I think that's really important to mention, because some of us have the opportunity to do that, but we just simply refuse to grow. We simply refuse to try and not be ignorant. We refuse to be open. We refuse to be open to a new experience. And Che was not refusing that. He was very much open to that. And so we should think about that. I also want to note, before I move to the next slide, that, we're so lucky, and we should really acknowledge that we're so lucky that Che was interested in writing about his life experiences. I don't know if you all have just stopped to think for just a second, but what if there was a possibility that none of our ancestors had chose to document their thoughts? If none of our ancestors had chose to write how they were feeling, or write what experiences they were going through? If Kwame Nkrumah had not wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, if Marcus Garvey had not asked his partner to write Garvey and Garveyism, where would we be in terms of having that information? We understand that, some of the information may have been, rerouted in a different way, and maybe the original author may not have said it in that way. But for the most part, most of these revolutionary comrades that we honor and that we respect, that we love and that we adore, that we are strongly influenced by, and that are still making an impact on our lives and on this organization's life, but on other organizations, siblings that we have as well. If none of them had chose to write down and document what they were going through, document the steps that they took to navigate that, document why they joined these organizations, document why they were happy to join those organizations, or even documenting why they decided to step back and join a different organization, to start a new organization. If none of them had wrote down any of their thoughts, and you're like me, where you were never going to be alive at a time that they were alive, it would really change the trajectory of how we have access to credible information today. So we are lucky that Che decided to write about his life experiences, more specifically about the time that he was on the motorcycle with his friends. He created a diary because of that. And some of you may be familiar with that because it became a motion picture. Next slide, please. So we can think more about that and think about how this is exactly what I'm starting to say is now these experiences that he's having, they're starting to shape him in a different way. He's starting to unpack things. He's starting to be more critical. He's starting to ask more questions. These are all good things. And we try to encourage you all not to be ashamed of those things, because the system that we live in, if you are suffering like we are and you live in backward USA, then you understand that it's not attractive for you to ask questions. It's not attractive for you to raise questions. It's not attractive for you to think. It's not attractive for you to want to think. It's not attractive for you to try to change and evolve. It's not attractive for you to try to persuade people to change and evolve. This is precisely why the overwhelming majority of us are not in organizations working for justice, because to be in an organization that is working for justice means that you are ultimately working against the US capitalist government. That's ultimately what that means, because the government's intention is to treat you and to teach you to be individualized, to be selfish, to only think about yourself, and most importantly, to only think about making that money. That's the only objective of US capitalist America. Whereas if you're in an organization that is working for justice, and we always say that is working for justice. Notice that we never say if you're in an organization, because there's plenty of organizations out there that are not working for justice. So we're not advocating for them. We're advocating for you to be in an organization that is putting people first, that is putting the needs of people first, that understands that the needs of the people will always outweigh the income. It will always, always, always outweigh the income, because these are organizations driven by the people. So what better way to focus on the people than to make sure that they are the priority? That makes sense to me. I don't know about you all. That makes perfect sense to me. That's why I am in work study the process, and I'm hoping to advance into becoming a part of this organization, because I believe that the masses should come first. I believe that with my whole heart. I believe that with every bone in my body, every single blood cell in my body. And so when Che was having these experiences, he was starting to unpack that on a different level. And so we can think more about how, because of these experiences, now he's starting to reevaluate his life a little bit. And he's starting to think and ask more questions. And so this is a good thing. His experiences in 1954 in Guatemala, oh man, that was life-changing for him. That was completely life-changing for him. It impacted his life direction, as a matter of fact, and impacted the way that he was going about things. Unfortunately, another issue that impacted him quite heavily would be the US-backed coup that actually overthrew a very legitimate sitting president by the name of Jacobo Arbenz. And so unfortunately, this coup resulted in the US government's plan to ultimately protect the United Front's dominance over Central America. And how did that impact our comrade Che? Well, the experience radicalized him. It radicalized him, and he ultimately became an anti-imperialist activist because of that experience. So we're talking about the 1954 situation in Guatemala that changed his life course. Then we're talking about his experiences along with Guatemala in 1954. Then we have the US-backed coup that took out a legitimately sitting president. And all of that was connected to, for what? To protect the United Front. And from there, this anti-imperialist activist, also known as Che Guevara, was born. And so we can think more about how experiences are everything, but sometimes we go through experiences, you all, and we don't pay attention to what we're supposed to take from them. We don't pay attention to the fact that we're supposed to grow from that experience. This is also a value, well, not value. I would say this is also a message that US capitalist America wants to teach you, is that you should not be growing. You should not be evolving. You should not want to struggle. You should just have all your money and live very comfortably, excuse me, and not have any reason to want to struggle or have any challenges in any way, because as long as you're making all this money, you shouldn't have any issues. When in actuality, you have issues from the moment that your parents conceived you. You've had issues, especially if you were born poor, or if you were born differently abled, or if you were born and you wanted to identify as LGBTQ. If you were born and you were not considered to have male privilege and could be considered a man, you were going to have issues. If you were born and your people were colonized, you were definitely going to have issues. That's just the bottom line. And so when we think more about that, we have to think about how it's okay for us to have challenges. Challenges make us stronger and they help us grow. In the previous slide, I made a joke about mountain climbers, but I intentionally set a goal when I am doing mountain climbers. I think about a particular group or a person, and I dedicate my time to them, because it takes my mind off of the fact that I am tired, and it makes me focus on the fact that I have thousands of generations of people who have come before me who have done so much more than some stupid 20-second mountain climbers. I start thinking about all my African ancestors who were enslaved and how they were brutally raped by Marion Sims and other plantation owners. I think about all of my African comrades who lost their children. I think about African comrades whose children had to make difficult decisions and leave the plantation without their parents. I think of my African comrades who were scratching their nails in the slave castle because they didn't even want to get on the boat. I think of my indigenous comrades and how they had to make sacrifices, how they were trying their best to protect their land, and they were lied to, all in all, lied to, raped, murdered, killed. And I think about how even in 2023, we still have to let people know that you should not be celebrating a holiday that celebrates murder, rape, and theft of land. Like, I think about all these things, you all. I think about children that can't afford to eat and they're distracted in school. I think about people who are on the streets when the temperature is 30 degrees outside and they have nowhere to go. And I set that intention because the whole purpose of this seminar is to remind all of us that we need to get out of our own heads and consider the possibility that somebody somewhere else is dealing with something a lot more tough than us. And if we as humanists can come together, then we can organize ways around dealing with those toughnesses so that those folks don't have to deal with that no more. And in us doing that, then we can affect our own situations and things will be better for all of us. We all should want to live in a better world where none of us should be unhoused, where none of us should have to deal with homophobia, where none of us should have to deal with Palestine being bombed. That should never happen, where Palestinians lost their land. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. We don't have time to be too worried about being uncomfortable. We need to be really okay with being uncomfortable, because being uncomfortable is one of the most satisfying feelings in the world. It can be scary at first, of course. I understand that. But I also understand that if any of my ancestors had risked not being uncomfortable, we may not be here today. We may not be here today talking to you. We may not be here today biologically. We may not be here today ideologically. We may not be here today in terms of the legacy that our people have left for us. It is their legacy that I carry on. Every single day I wake up thinking about all that they went through so that I could be able to hopefully do this research and publish on this and help people understand what really went down and how powerful African women really are. Like, these are the things that we have to think about, you all. But that comes at a price. We're going to have to be uncomfortable because we shouldn't enjoy thinking about the torture and the abuse that our people went through, but we should use that to understand they could have chose to walk away just like we could, but they chose not to. They chose to fight and they chose to face it head on, and they chose to deal with it because they were thinking about us, which means we need to honor and respect them, and we need to think about the children who have not been born yet. That is the only way that this is going to continue to work. If we suddenly decide to become selfish and only think about our needs, then none of this is going to be for nothing for the children who are being conceived right now. They are not going to know who they are. And more importantly, they're not going to take responsibility for making the world a better place. Everyone has that responsibility. Every single person has that responsibility. And if children don't learn that from the people in their families, then we should teach it to them, because they still need to understand that they have a responsibility. None of this is to just be taken. All of this comes at a cost. And so we can think more about that. And again, we can give thanks to Che for the choices and the decisions that he had to make, where he decided to take this motorcycle experience and then started experiencing these things because he was being exposed to these different opportunities, which started helping him think more clearly about his life, his positionality, his privilege, and what was really going on. And so with that, I encourage you all to join an organization that is working for justice. At this point, it should already have been on your list of things to do, but if it is not, you should at least be donating. And we have there on the slide the link for you to follow so that you can donate and at least support Pan-African organizations that are working for justice. If you don't want to join one, you can at least support a Pan-Africanist organization that is working for justice. And so with that, I close. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you very much. And just to follow up with what you're saying about the Thomas Sankara Center for Pan-African Unity, for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, apologies. Again, please click on the link or the QR code, which we showed on the first slide and we'll show again on the last slide. And from either of those methods, it'll lead you to the Patreon site. And from there, you can just simply sign up to become a monthly donor, $20 a month, 20 US dollars a month, or whatever $20 equals in your currency, wherever you are. That's all that we're asking you for. And that'll go a long way towards buying books for our people on the ground in Burkina Faso. This is the work we do because political education is essential to providing a revolutionary education that can lead to revolutionary action. So please do that. And please put a note in letting us know that you've done that. You know, don't worry about, somebody said to me, well, I don't want to be on the radar. You're already on the radar. When you came out of your mama's womb, you were on the radar. It's way too late to worry about that. It's a time for justice. It's a time not to be afraid of standing up for what's right. So please become a donor to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity. And please let us know that you're doing that. It's very much appreciated. So we still have that URL. It'll be on all the screens for the time we have. And we'll just talk a minute. The picture you see on the screen is essential to understanding Ernesto Che Guevara's political evolution. Because after the coup d'etat in Guatemala that overthrew as Shakur mentioned, the legitimately elected government of Jacobo Arbenz, this was done with the backing of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. You know, again, we call them criminals in action, CIA. And there was a typo. It was to ensure the continued dominance in the Americas by the United Fruit Corporation. They had plantations for fruit development all over the Western Hemisphere, and they were obviously a multi-billion-dollar corporation that did not want to see their products nationalized by left-leaning governments like that of Arbenz in Guatemala. So his government was overthrown, and subsequent protests kicked off as a result of that. And Ernesto Che Guevara found himself protesting in Mexico City, Mexico, and arrested and thrown in jail. The critical error that the imperialists made is they put him in the same cell with all of the Cuban revolutionaries who were arrested and imprisoned because of their work in the Moncada garrison raid in 1953 in Santiago de Cuba to try and get access to all of the armaments in the Moncada garrison there. I've been to the Moncada garrison in Santiago, Cuba, and it was a building that these revolutionaries tried to get in there and get those armaments. And because of that, they were arrested in Mexico City as well. And as I mentioned, placed in the same cell as Ernesto Guevara. And the picture you see is of them in the cell there with Fidel Castro on the left and Ernesto Guevara on the right. And they stayed up every night. And this was feeding healthy food into Ernesto Guevara's already sweltering anger at what he'd observed in Guatemala. And Fidel talked about what needed to happen in Cuba, the revolutionary process in Cuba, and how this is what needed to happen all over the Americas and all over the world. And that night, that first night they were in jail together, Ernesto asked Fidel, "Can I join you? I'm not Cuban, I'm from Argentina, but can I join you?" And the Cuban said, "Of course you can." And he became that night, that first night, a part of the process to liberate Cuba. And that's how that happened. And then another thing, just for historical purposes, is where did the name Che come from? So in Argentina, at least at that time, I've talked to friends from Argentina today, and they say it still happens. But certainly in that time, in the 1950s, with people in Argentina, when you were saying something to them that they thought had a lot of truth and legitimacy to it, they would respond by saying Che, Che. Just like today people might say word, or, you know, I feel that, or I heard that, or whatever. People in Argentina would say the word Che. And so the time in jail with the Cubans, every time Fidel and one of the other Cubans that were there, Juan Almeida, the African, whoever, said something that Ernesto agreed with, he would say Che. The Cubans thought that was funny, so they named him Che. And that's where the name Che in Che Guevara came from. And so once he was certainly a part of their plans, they told him, and they built that trust, they told him about their desire and plan to get a ship and to go into Cuba and wage this armed struggle against the Batista regime in Cuba. See, y'all got to understand the history, because they'll tell you anything. And you talking about you got a position on Cuba. I've talked to people born and raised in Cuba, and they're telling me I'm born in Cuba. I don't give a damn. That doesn't mean anything. You know, I'm born and raised in San Francisco, California, in the United States of America. And I don't even have to go 5 feet in San Francisco to find someone else born and raised in San Francisco who doesn't know a damn thing about what's happening in San Francisco on a political level. So just because someone's from somewhere doesn't mean they know squat. And you're a soft-brained person if you accept that. Oh, they're from there, so obviously they have credibility in what they're talking about. You think about yourself. You don't even know what's going on where you live politically. Like, come on, we got to get on a more mature and sophisticated level than that. I mean, that's child's play. So they engaged in this process to get this ship to go into Cuba. And that ship was called the Grandma, to overthrow this backward dictatorial Batista regime, Fulgencio Batista, backed 100% by US imperialism, right? And these revolutionaries wanted to change that. So they had the Grandma, and if you know the history, the Grandma sank in the Caribbean Sea, and only 11 people survived. The rest of the people on board was almost about 100 people were killed, drowned. And Fidel, Raul Castro, his brother, who is still alive, obviously Ernesto Che Guevara, Juan Almeida, and a few others were the survivors. And they went into the Sierra Maestra mountains there in Santiago, where I've also been. And that's where the armed struggle for the Cuban Revolution started in 1956. Now, in terms of Che's role with the revolution, and we again have the Patreon URL on the screen, support the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity on the ground in Burkina Faso. And please drop a note letting us know that you've done that. So Che and the Cuban Revolution, Che led the successful military expedition into Santa Clara in Cuba. He became a military commander in doing that. And it was evident early on, even at that point, that this man was not what you see in like the US military, for example, where the high commanders in the US military, you know, they send everybody into battle. They don't go into battle themselves. The distinction about Che Guevara is that when he led a contingent of troops, he ran in front of the troops to fight the enemy. This man was courageous and fearless. I know a lot of us are cowards, so we don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense to us. But this man was courageous and dedicated to his mission for justice. So he ran out in front of everyone. In fact, it was his commitment to doing that that led to him getting killed. But at this point in 1959, he led the expedition into Santa Clara. Other military units were able to successfully gain access to other cities and control. And when that happened in Havana, the military aspect of the Cuban Revolution was achieved. And Che was assigned, once the Cuban revolutionary government came to power in 1959, 1960, he was assigned the role of Minister of the Interior. So what this meant is that his role was to oversee the affairs of the developing government, to make sure that government was developing in a way that was healthy and was designed to serve the interests of the Cuban people. So you had the Committees for Defense and Revolution. They were the on-the-ground neighborhood units of the Cuban Revolution to oversee the policies that they were implementing, the literacy campaign, which now, today, it resulted in 99% of Cubans being literate. You don't even have that level of literacy in this backward cesspool country. Free healthcare, free education, all of those things were implemented at that time in Cuba's society. But his role as Minister of the Interior had a lot to do with a lot of the misinformation that these backward reactionaries are using today to confuse you. Because in 1960, they had in Cuba what was called the La Habana trials. And what those trials were is, again, getting back to Batista, the dictator that the Cuban Revolution overthrew, you all have to understand that this was a brutal dictatorship that terrorized the Cuban people for years. Terrorized them. People disappeared. You spoke up against the government, you just disappeared. Your family never saw you again. You were lucky if they just tortured you and amputated one of your limbs and didn't kill you. I mean, just a brutal, vicious, backward, primitive regime that was backed so totally by US tax dollars, as is always the case, right? That's always what they do, is back brutal, vicious dictators, just like now, the way they back the Zionist state of Israel, brutal, vicious dictators in 2023. And where is if it was not for the $4 billion annually that the United States gives to the Zionist state of Israel, they would have no power and capacity to terrorize the Palestinian people the way they do. That's where your tax dollars go. It has always gone to support vicious, brutal dictators. So Che was assigned the role of Minister of the Interior because the people of Cuba wanted retaliation and revenge against the terrorists who carried out these consistent acts of violence against their family members in Cuba. So the Cuban people wanted to just round these people up and execute them. And so Che's job was to ensure that there was some order and justice to the process of these trials. And that's exactly what he did. So anyone who studies the La Habana trial period knows that, yeah, there were several hundred people who were put on trial, found guilty, and executed. And there were a percentage of those people who years later, it was determined maybe they were not guilty. Most of them were without question guilty, but there were a percentage of them that maybe they were not guilty. And this was an unfortunate era because of the high tension around the topic. Again, if it were left up to the Cuban people, all of them would have been killed even without a trial. So the effort was made to bring justice. And if you know anything about the Cuban system of justice, you can't find an international observer that challenges the credibility of that system. All types of international observers question the illegitimacy of this backwards so-called injustice system. But they did the best they could. They made errors. They weren't even a year old as a government. They made errors. They didn't have the experience, and they did the best they could. But what the capitalists have done is they've turned this around because they know you don't know anything about what I just talked about. At least 99% of us don't. So they've turned this around and they call Che a murderer because of the La Habana trials. And if you don't believe me, just ask next time you hear somebody say, or if you believe it, because you don't know anything else, because I've talked to people all the time and they're like, well, Che Guevara was a murderer. I'm like, well, who did he murder? Well, I don't know. Well, then how the hell are you calling somebody a murderer? You don't know. You know, I talked to a European man. He said that. I said that's like me calling you a Ku Klux Klan member. Well, I'm not a Ku. I said, well, how do I know that? Because apparently we can make accusations with no evidence. So if he's a murderer, you're a Ku Klux Klan member. Oh, I see your point, dumbass. So my point is that, you know, this man, if he were not involved in those trials, there would have been a whole lot more people unceremoniously murdered. And the Cuban government acknowledged the error and did the best they could to provide support and compensation for the families. And these right-wing, backward capitalist reactionaries tried to turn that around and make you think Che Guevara was a bad person because of this. And what does the United States of America apologize for and provided? They've never done that. Whatever they have done, it's only been because of the constant organizing against them that's created leverage and forced them to do it. Every treaty they created for the indigenous people, they've backed out and broken their word on every one. But the only reason why they exist is because of the struggle the indigenous people have engaged. Everything that they did, like the Tuskegee experiment, that's only because we brought that truth to the surface and they had to compensate those people. If it were not for that, they never would have done that. So who the hell are they to question a legitimate effort at justice? This is no evidence of anybody being a murderer. This is an example of the humanity of the Cuban Revolution. That's what the La Habana trials were. And Che's participation and overseeing of those trials saved thousands of lives. There were thousands of people that were put on trial. And again, if it were not for the process that he oversaw, the people wanted to kill all those people because in their minds, they had saw them as perpetuators of the brutality of the Batista regime. You got to study this history. You can't let these crackers tell you this stuff and well, if they said it, it must be true. No, the only thing that's true is you're an absolute idiot under any circumstances. If you accept after 531 years, you're going to listen to anything these people say, then we can't call you anything else except an idiot. So what are Che's contributions to internationalism? Because again, they will take what he wrote in his diary in the motorcycle diaries. You know, they're so brazen with their lies because they know that most of us are never going to investigate it, that they will even, I saw it the other day on a article that these cowards wrote, and they quoted Che talking about quote unquote black people are dirty. And they wrote next to it 1952. So all you have to do is do the math. If you didn't flunk math in school, all you have to do is do the math. And if you did the math, you would know that this dude was only 22 years old when he made this statement. He was not even yet engaged in the situation that happened in Guatemala we described to you. That didn't even happen until 2 years after that in 1954. He was unconscious. Like most of us were all of us were unconscious at some point. So what these people are telling you is that you should go back to something he said in 1952 and completely gauge him based on that statement, right? This sister told me, well, he said it, doesn't matter when he said it. I said, well, she had on an American flag. I'm like, well, you got on the American flag. And they enslaved our people and put us under Jim Crow. And you wearing that shirt. And they had not even changed and be different. This man grew in consciousness and worked to advance the conditions of African people. This backward US government has done nothing but continue to oppress us as a people. And you're so damn stupid, you got the flag on it, got the nerve to criticize someone with the credentials of Che Guevara. You are not, I told her, you're not quality enough person to lick the jail between his toes. You ain't worth a damn. So this is what we have to start saying to these backward people and stop just sitting there looking like a deer in the headlights because we don't know a damn thing. We got to start engaging in this study, in this process, so we can understand how to deal with these crooks and thugs. So let's talk about the internationalism. Yeah, I get fired up talking because I'm tired of this nonsense. You know, these people, and what I get sick of is not, I expect them to do what they do. That's who they are. They're criminals. But I get tired when our own people parrot what they say, because we're so damn lazy, we can't even pick up a book and read it. And you can't tell them anything. You try to tell them, well, this is actually the history. They don't want to hear it. That's what I get sick of. And we have to create a culture where that's no longer acceptable to behave that way. That's what we're trying to do. So enjoy it while you can, those of you that engage in that backward behavior, because we know the history. We know of Che's desire to fight imperialism. And the picture in the top left, this man led 100 African Cubans because of his military commander experience in the Cuban Revolution to the Congo in Central Africa. And we just had, if you don't know the history of the Congo, then you need to, we just did a program on it 2 weeks ago, Sabotage in the Congo. Look it up. Go to abetterworld.me and watch it, or go to YouTube directly and watch it. But we lay out in clear detail how US imperialism, Belgium imperialism, European white man imperialism sabotaged the Congo in Central Africa. So these revolutionaries went there to try to do what they could to stop that from happening. So my point for that is that they want to tell you that you should discredit this man for a simple statement he made in 1952 at 22 years old, when you're 55 years old and you said some dumbass stuff last night. But yet you want to tell me that we should discredit this man for something he said when he was 22, and I'm supposed to just totally dismiss the fact that he went to Africa and put his life on the line for our people, and you haven't lifted a toenail for our people, and I'm supposed to just ignore that about him and listen to your dumb ass. Not gonna happen. We know the history. We've got to wake up. I don't want to say wake up, because they said that's not a good thing. Wake up, become woke, understand that it's time to think as a free people and act as a free people. That means acquiring information for ourselves and not listening to our enemies and letting them shape our world analysis. Assata Shakur said, only a stupid people let their enemies define the world they live in. I mean, we have got to get better, you all. We've got to step up our game. This is unacceptable to our children and future generations for us to be so satisfied to be so stupid in 2023. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to say that any differently. If it gets offended, maybe that can wake us up. So Che's actions in the Congo, not only did he go there and do what I just described, which was phenomenal in and of itself, but he was able to establish the relationships in Africa that led to a political and military connection in Africa. And after his experience in the Congo, they were not able to overthrow the US-backed regime in the Congo, but he went to Tanzania. And when I was in Tanzania a few short years ago, we were able to go to the Cuban Revolution there in Dar es Salaam, and I was able to, the ambassador said, do you want to see where Che? I said, I would love to see where Che. He took us up to the other floor where Che lived, where he ate and cooked his meals, where he studied. And he spent that time developing those relationships through the embassy. And from that, we were able to see the development of Cuba's military presence in Africa. And this is fundamental because Cuba went to Guinea-Bissau, where I was just a few short months ago. And they helped train the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, in military combat and efficiency and effectiveness against the Portuguese colonists. And of course, we know Guinea-Bissau was able to throw them out of the Portuguese out of Guinea-Bissau. And there are monuments to Che Guevara all over Guinea-Bissau as a result of that. And because people in Africa are not stupid, they understand that his presence in the Congo helped open the door to Cuba's military support for African liberation. And if you look on my Facebook page, I'm standing next to one of the Che Guevara monuments in Guinea-Bissau. The white supremacists look at it because they go on my page and make comments all the time. So they're doing their research. So we should at least know something about this history, because that presence of Cuba in Guinea-Bissau led to their involvement in supporting the popular movement for the liberation of Angola in Angola. And this was fundamental because they sent approximately 500,000 troops to Angola. And at that time, the reactionary racists in Southern Africa, led by the then apartheid government of South Africa, had the support of the South African military, which was backed by U.S. imperialism. Of course, the racist South African government was totally backed by the U.S. military. Of course it was. And they had the support of Britain and France and all of the backward capitalist regimes. They had the white mercenaries, Mike Moore and all of those ex-Nazis from Nazi Germany were down there in Southern Africa, killing our people, dismembering them. They had all of that back in them. The reactionary forces in Angola, and meanwhile, the popular movement for liberation in Angola had no one except the Cubans. So the 500,000 troops they sent there, they were able to push back all of those racists. And by the time 1990 came around, the racists had to give up. They could no longer fight against the Cubans and the MPLA in Angola. They knew they were going to get there, you know what's kicked. So they had to give up. So the negotiation for the Cubans to leave Southern Africa was that Namibia would be granted its independence. And that happened. Was that Angola would become independent. And that happened. It was that Nelson Mandela would be freed from prison at Robben Island in Azania, South Africa. And that happened. And all of that happened so that the Cubans could stop kicking ass against the racists in Southern Africa. And all of this happened because of Che Guevara's relationship in Africa. Had it not happened, all of Southern Africa would be under racist apartheid today. And so you're going to tell me that I should discredit Che Guevara because of something he said when he was 22, when you're 92 and you still ain't said nothing worth a damn your whole life, still ain't said nothing worth listening to. You got to be out of your goddamn mind. So future military support, as we said, led to these events in Africa happening. No question about that. This is why we love this man. And just to illustrate the spirit of Ernesto Che Guevara, because I consider him I have many ideological fathers, and he is without question, I don't care that he's European, he was a man that dedicated his life for justice. And unlike so many of us, he didn't just talk about it, he put his life on the line for justice. And he lost his life fighting for justice. And this is outlined, I think, very beautifully by something Kwame Nkrumah said, because Shakur mentioned how Kwame Nkrumah, like Che Guevara, wrote about his life experiences. So in 1965, when Guevara was undercover, because of his intention to eventually wage the revolutionary mission in Bolivia, where he lost his life, he went to Ghana for 2 weeks and stayed as a personal guest of Kwame Nkrumah in Accra, Ghana. And Nkrumah, after Che Guevara left, and after, several years later, after Che Guevara was murdered, Nkrumah wrote that those 2 weeks that he spent with Che, he was so impressed with, some people say all this stuff and you're like, yeah, they ain't gonna do nothing. And Nkrumah talked about Che Guevara, like when he said he was gonna do something, you could tell that this man was gonna do it. And Nkrumah wrote that he knew Che Guevara would die on the battlefield, which of course he absolutely did, because of his courage and commitment to fighting imperialism. He knew that. He knew he wasn't going to die in no bathroom accident, in no car accident. He wasn't going to die of old age. He was going to die on the battlefield. And that's what happened to him in Bolivia. And I think that's an outstanding tribute to the type of person that Ernesto Che Guevara was. That's the Ernesto Che Guevara that we know, and that we remember, and that we honor, and that our people all over the African continent honor. You want to listen to these enemies of humanity tell you who Che Guevara is, tell you who Kwame Nkrumah is, tell you who El Hajj Malik El Shabazz is, tell you who Assata Shakur is, tell you who Shirley Graham Du Bois is, tell you who Sekou Touré is, tell you who Huey P. Newton is. If you want to listen to these enemies of humanity tell you who these people are, then you go ahead and do that, because we're going to continue to build our movement. And we're not worried about that, because as we gain strength, and we are without question doing that, we will get strong enough so that we will be able to walk right over your chest, right along with all the slave masters that you put your lot in with. So we love Che Guevara. And on this date, October 8th, when we commemorate when his physical presence was taken from us by the Central Intelligence Agency and U.S. imperialism in Bolivia and the Americas, we honor his presence. And as Fred Hampton, another revolutionary they took from us, said, you can kill the revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution. You can kill Che Guevara, you can't kill what he represented. We stand firm on his ideas today, and we will continue to fight in his and every other ancestor we have honor until we are free, until we are liberated, until the majority of the world is socialist, leading to worldwide communism. That's what we're about. That is what's going to happen. And we honor the people like Che who have made contributions to put us in a position to forward this progress. So we thank you for joining us. And we want to invite you back next week. We're going to talk about on October 15th. And I've seen, we just, again, like, we don't study. Like, I've seen all these people mean well, I get it, but we've got to be really dedicated to telling the truth and not being sloppy about it. So I see all these posts, and they say October 1st is a historical day where the Black Panther Party for self-defense it was October 15th. It's a minor detail, but we have to be dedicated to truth, because the people it's our best weapon. And the people we're fighting against have no concern about truth. So we can't be sloppy with truth. So October 15th is next Sunday, and we're going to commemorate that program to the rise of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The Black Panther Party started a year before that by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Lowndes County, Alabama. So we'll talk a little about that, but we're going to talk about the Black Panther Party for self-defense in Oakland, California, 1966, October 15th, and their legacy, and a quality assessment of the things we learned from them that can help us be stronger in the future. So please join us. Go to the APRP Forward Ever shop, get you some revolutionary gear, tell some people, y'all, it's coming up. You celebrate these imperialist holidays. I'm not throwing shade at you, but if you're going to do it, then support revolutionary African organization. Buy some clothes from the APRP and give them to your family. Help them raise their consciousness. Instead of just giving them liquor or some worthless gift, give them something that's going to build them up. Go to aprp-intl.org and join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And if you don't want to join the APRP, then join the Black Alliance for Peace. If you don't want to join the Black Alliance for Peace, join some other organization working for our people. If you don't see one, then start the I'm Glad His Hour is Up organization and organize our people for justice under the I'm Glad His Hour is Up organization. And we will even help you. We don't have that kind of ego. We want our people to be free. You could come to us and say, I can't stand you, Jamu, I hate you, but I want to organize, and I will help you organize. I don't care nothing about you hating me. I'm not looking for friends. I got plenty of, I say it all the time, trying to get rid of some. So I don't care about that. I'm trying to get free, you all, and I'm trying to get our people free. So organization is the weapon of the oppressed. So do that. Go to betterworld.me. As I mentioned, if you don't know the history of the Congo, we've got 350 videos there, and they give you history. They give you irrefutable history. So you can start your political education there. Go to betterworld.me. They're all there. You can check them out. And go to Hood Communist every Thursday. There are articles that come out, support revolutionary African voices. Please do that. And again, there's the QR code and the URL. Donate to the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity, an APRP project on the ground in Burkina Faso, along with other African revolutionaries. So support that. It's something we have to do. And if we don't do it, I don't know who else we think is going to do it. We're not asking you to send them $500 a month. If you got $15, $20, do that. It's supporting real on-the-ground activity. We have all our programs there. Support each and every one of them. My book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Please make sure you get that. All proceeds go towards buying materials to fight fascists, which is what we still do in our 60s and will continue to do. So we thank you for joining us. Forward ever, backwards never. We are winning, you all. Don't let these people fool you with this bourgeoisie nonsense. We are winning this fight. That's why they're coming at us so hard. That's why they want to discredit Che Guevara, because they don't want you to be inspired, because they're afraid of what will happen when you get inspired. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never.